presentation that we have is a presentation by Marion Lee from Caltrain, and from the Caltrain Modernization Program Acting Director. Nice to see you this evening.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I'm the director of the Caltrain Modernization Program, and the timing worked out pretty well because there's been more activities lately, and we've been sort of in anxious mode to try and get out to all the cities, so we very much appreciate your time. I was actually sitting back there thinking, I don't think I'm not going to get an award after my presentation, but that's okay.
Maybe your daughter will give you one.
So the presentation today, I wanted to hit two topics. One is just an update on the planning process that we've been engaging all the cities in about what it is we want to do out there in the Caltrain corridor. And then the second part has to do with an early investment proposal that was really sparked by inquiry from the High-Speed Rail Authority. So just some context that will help with the update that I'm providing. Caltrain for a very long time has had a vision to modernize its system. And the way to modernize was envisioned to involve electrifying our diesel system, which would provide a greener service to our customers, and also to be able to provide more service as our customer base is anticipated to grow. As we were trying to electrify our system, which is a vision adopted by our board, we were struggling a lot with funding, which is very typical of transit agency projects. And while we were struggling, High-Speed Rail, and it was approved by the voters. And High-Speed Rail made a policy decision to access its terminus market in downtown San Francisco through the Caltrain corridor. Both systems desire an electrified corridor. Caltrain always had a vision to electrify even before high-speed rail was here, and high-speed rail technology needs electrification. This desire and want formed the partnership that we have today. And the desire of this partnership is to combine the resources that we were able to pull for our efforts and the new resources that would come with the high-speed rail system to electrify the corridor. With this partnership, high-speed rail had an original plan for our corridor that didn't go so smoothly. The original idea was to build a large project, and we've been calling it the full build project. We call it the large project because what it envisioned was essentially expanding what is essentially a 2-track corridor to a 4-track system, and that the system would be fully grade separated, that there would be no at-grade crossings. In concept, this sounded fine, but we have a lot of cities that are built up along our corridors, and it would create impacts that were not acceptable to our local communities. And there was a local rejection of this concept. It wasn't in total, but it was a lot. From that rejection, High-Speed Rail has put all of its design and project-level environmental activities in the peninsula on hold. There's still activities that evolve around their programmatic document for the whole system, and also project-level activities in other segments. But for this segment, there are no design and environmental activities for a full build 4-track project. As the efforts in the peninsula were put on hold, we had 3 elected officials ask us to adopt a different strategy. That was U.S. Congresswoman Anna Eshoo, Senator Simidian, and Assemblyman Gordon. And they said, stop thinking about the large project and think about building something smaller. And they call that the blended system. What is it? It also looks at an electrified corridor to serve both Caltrain and high-speed rail. And it is supposed to take these trains all the way to downtown San Francisco, But the key difference between what these elected officials are proposing compared to the original concept is it said, use the existing tracks that you have today and minimize track expansion and encroaching outside of the right-of-way. What this essentially does is it minimizes impacts to the communities that have grown along the corridor. It lowers the project cost, and with that, it would help with project delivery. When we were asked to consider this concept as a transit operator, we realized there's multiple considerations. Operations is not the only thing, but that was the first question we asked. Can Caltrain share its tracks with high-speed rail? To answer this question, we worked with a consulting firm called LTK, and they customized a commuter simulation model for us. And what they modeled was the existing main tracks as you see them today. They assumed that the system was electrified, and we had in place an advanced signal system. It assumed 3 high-speed rail stations, and it also tested one more thing, which was an idea of passing tracks. Passing tracks are additional tracks for a limited segment of the corridor that would be used by high-speed rail trains to bypass the slower Caltrain trains, which would make more frequent stops. The important distinguisher here is that some people say, well, passing tracks, that's no different than four-tracking the whole corridor. The difference is the larger project contemplated four-tracking what was a 50-mile corridor. The passing tracks is approximately 8 to 10 miles. So yes, it's 4 tracks, but it's for a segment of the total corridor. In testing those facilities, what the model told us was that, yes, Caltrain, you can share your tracks with high-speed rail and run reliable service. That with those facilities in place, there was a potential to run up to a total of 10 trains per hour per direction. Today, Caltrain runs 5 trains per hour per direction. Now, with those 10 trains, that's with passing tracks. If we don't have passing tracks, we can support up to 8. So with or without passing tracks, we're able to support both Caltrain and high-speed rail systems. We tested 2 speed variables up to 79 miles per hour, which is what we operate today. And we also tested faster speeds up to 110 miles per hour, and both speeds are also viable. This is a visual depiction of the planning process that Caltrain is facilitating with the local stakeholders. The capacity analysis that I just described is in the yellow box. And in the green box are 2 planning efforts that we are working on right now. These 2 planning efforts really came out of our outreach associated with the capacity analysis. The first green box, called Service Plan Operations Considerations, the essential scope of that is people said, you have a model and we'd like for you to test different what-if scenarios. What happens if you insert a baby bullet service? What happens if you insert the Dumbarton project? What happens if you extend the model all the way to downtown San Francisco? So these were a few of the what-if scenarios people asked to be tested, and so that's what we're conducting. The second green box is called the Grade Crossings and Traffic Analysis. We have a very big question that we have not yet been able to answer, but we hope that this planning study will start to get at the crux of the question, which is we have 40 at-grade crossings along our approximate 50-mile rail corridor. When we were initially, high-speed rail was initially contemplating a full larger project, a 4-track project, it was envisioned that everything would be grade separated. Now that we are exploring the concept of a smaller project with the tracks essentially where they are, it is unclear what we should be doing with all of the at-grade crossings. There is only one regulation that requires grade separations, and that is if you operate trains at above 125 miles per hour, you must grade separate. The speeds that we are contemplating does not exceed 110 miles per hour. It doesn't mean that we might not desire it for other reasons, but there are no clear-cut regulations that would dictate grade separations in the blended system that we're contemplating today. From the 3 colored boxes, what we hope to do is have a dialogue with our local our local stakeholders about first knowing what we know, what level of service do we want to provide to our customers today and tomorrow. Caltrain with high-speed rail, Caltrain without high-speed rail, if with high-speed rail, how much of that service. Once we land on what those options are, we can then start to identify what infrastructure is needed to provide that level of service, what the fleet needs are, and all the cost implications ranging from the upfront investment to potential financing to ongoing operations and maintenance costs. Once we identify those elements, what we'd like to lay out is a decision-making matrix. Every service plan option will entail trade-offs and compromises by all the stakeholders involved, and it will say if this is what service level you desire, this is what's required. For this level of investment and return on investment, this is what's going to be required by all of the stakeholders involved. With that tool, we hope to have a policy level discussion with all the stakeholders in the cities to ideally land on what we're calling blended system alternatives. And these would be the alternatives, not that we necessarily sign off on, but the alternatives that we think are worth studying further through an environmental process, which would then lend us to a locally preferred alternative. So that was the planning that is the planning that we are trying to do and have been doing probably for the last 6 months or so. And we were sort of chugging along at a pretty good pace, a pace that worked for our stakeholders. And then something new happened, and that's what this is about. And this part is really, it's even more a work in progress than the part that I just presented. So there's a lot of to be determined, but it's the milestone that we've hit thus far. Oops. How do I get rid of that? Thank you. So, so this is what happened as we were doing our thing and trying to build a local vision. The high-speed rail draft business came out in November, and people have lots of thoughts about it. It's got a lot of components to it, but Caltrain zoomed in on a particular chapter of the business plan that we welcomed. It was the first time that high-speed rail put in writing in a document that a blended system is what makes sense for our peninsula corridor. They also acknowledged that it made sense for the southern bookend. We're called bookends. And what it also said was we are building out from the Central Valley to north and south, which would have made us one of the last segments to get invested in. But what the business plan said was it doesn't have to be that way, and that high-speed rail welcomed partnering with agencies like ours to think about how to make early investments in the system. Since that draft plan came out, high-speed rail has been in contact with Los Angeles area as well as our area and the various transportation agencies, and they said, hey, if we can find some money and we can build those projects early, what projects would you build? And so with that question, Southern California has already defined their projects, and we're working on what our projects are to be. In the next couple of slides, we'll talk about Caltrain's interest in what projects to advocate for. In going through that thought process, we first set some parameters. Some parameters were given to us, some we interjected ourselves. First, the projects that we propose must be located in the San Francisco to San Jose segment of the statewide system. That the projects must support both Caltrain modernization and the blended system. That we don't want to compromise the local planning process while we identify these projects and figure out how to do early investment projects. That what we're looking at is a short-term time frame, and while the time frame is not definitively clear, if we take some hint from the Los Angeles area, they're looking at a 2020 time frame. So we're looking at about an 8-year block of time. And that the funding to do these projects would come from the Prop A funding and match. And match being it could be local, state, federal, it just can't be Prop 1A matching Prop 1A. In terms of how much, again, this is an indication from what LA has set up. It's a total, it could be up to $2 billion. It's probably less than that, but that's the amount that LA is working with. So it's about $1 billion of Prop 1A and $1 billion of match. So this is the draft proposal. The vision is that we would have a blended system in our corridor to downtown San Francisco. That this vision would be realized in 2 increments. The first increment, called the early investment, would get us an electrified Caltrain service. And when high-speed rail got to Diridon, that our service would function as feeder service. So high-speed rail riders on the system would get off at Diridon, and if that's not their final destination, they would then transfer onto our electrified Caltrain and go to their final destination. In this early investment scenario, there is no high-speed rail trains in our corridor. The recommended projects to achieve this is implementation of our advanced signal system, Caltrain electrification of the system, which deals with the poles and wires and the traction power facilities, conversion of our trains from diesel trains to electric, infrastructure upgrade, which has to do with things like upgrading our tunnels and our bridges, and some terminal work in the south terminal and north terminal areas. We have a placeholder for rail crossing upgrades. Earlier I said we didn't know what we were going to do with rail crossings yet, but we have heard from our stakeholders that there may be an interest in doing some early grade separations, especially to address potential local traffic impacts. And then the last item is San Francisco and San Jose. They are the 2 terminal points of this set, and they're trying to define what they might need in this early investment proposal. This gets to the second increment of the blended system. What this does is it finally achieves a 1-seat ride for high-speed rail passengers from LA all the way to San Francisco and vice versa. At this point, there would be high-speed rail trains in our corridor, and the cost and funding is to be determined. It is way beyond the $2 billion originally identified. The key projects would be the downtown extension project from 4th and King, our existing terminal today in San Francisco, to the new Trans-Bay terminal in downtown San Francisco, and this high-speed rail trains getting to that final destination is required by Prop 1A law. We would integrate the 2 systems. We would have to do some more infrastructure upgrades, like replacing our rail ties, maybe working on some straightening of our curbs to support higher speeds. We would finish all the upgrades necessary for the rest of the rail crossings. And then there are passing tracks. And the TBD is probably the most 3 important acronyms, because I almost get killed at every meeting when I talk about passing tracks. But it really is to be determined. We are looking at 5 concepts related to passing tracks. They are located in various locations throughout the corridor. We have not decided if we're going to have one, and if we have one, where it's going to be. There's a lot of speculation by various stakeholders that we've already decided, and that is just not true. We have been studying it, and when we'll be ready to present the findings to our stakeholders, we'll be at the end of the planning process that I identified in the earlier slide. If I can distract just for a little bit, because it's important. The first green, the colored green box at the top in the middle, the service plan operations considerations, that study is to be completed by the end of late summer this year. And in that study, we'll have completed the analysis of the 5 passing track options. It is our goal to lay out for the stakeholders the pros and cons associated with the 5 concepts so that we can have a dialogue about if it makes sense and if it does, where it might go. And then lastly, High-Speed Rail has been talking about a storage and maintenance facility in our corridor. This was something that made the city of Brisbane very anxious. It was a large facility that was sized to the large project of a 4-track system. Now that we are looking at a smaller project, we need to revisit the assumptions. First, ask if it's even necessary, and if so, how that might be downsized to fit a blended system. The outreach that we're conducting is with the cities and county along the corridor, and we've been continuing to do staff-level coordination. We've been working with other transportation agencies on the proposed projects. And then these are the public meetings that have been happening. Some city council meetings such as this, sometimes we present, sometimes other city staff present. And then we have 2 public venues that are scheduled. One is tomorrow, which is the San Mateo Rail Corridor Working Group Committee. And the other one is the PCC, which is happening this Friday. This is important in that we're working back from some time frames that are out of our control, and I'll start from the bottom up. High-speed rail is anticipated to bring the revised business plan, which will have discussions about some of the early investment concepts that we're talking about today. To what extent is unclear to me, but some of it will be in there. And that is to be presented to the High-Speed Rail Board on April 5th. Working backwards from there, agencies like us, agencies from San Francisco, are submitting their interested early investment projects to MTC, our Regional Metropolitan Transportation Commission, to reconcile and to balance the interests of the various jurisdictions on what early projects they want to invest in. And so MTC, working back from the April 5th date, is anticipated to go to one of their committees, their programming committee, on March 14th. Working back from that date, I need to go to our JPB board, and the one that fits within time frame is March 1st. So with those time frames in mind, we're doing the best we can with outreach, and I will conclude there and leave it for any questions.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Lee, for that presentation to bring us more up to date on what's going on with Caltrain. And we do have a few public speakers as well. I think just one thing you didn't really point out, the letter, there was a letter that was that Caltrain submitted, and it was in the press recently, and maybe
Yes.
you want to just talk about that too.
Sure. So one of the documents that's out by the High-Speed Rail Authority is in response to a lawsuit from City of Atherton on the high-speed rail programmatic environmental document. And so one of the court directions to high-speed rail was to do a partial update of their programmatic document. And so what was circulating, and I believe there were close of comments a week or two ago, but what was circulating was a partial update of that programmatic document. What that did was it made a lot of cities nervous again, because it's talking about a 4-track system for our peninsula segment. What our letter tried to do was express our understanding of why they did that. Basically, the programmatic document is from 2008, and in 2008, we didn't contemplate a blended system for our segment. And the court direction was to only do a partial update and not a whole update. And so there's a rationale behind why they still talk about it. But we also wanted to make a strong position to high-speed rail that while we understand that, we are not exploring a full build 4-track project for our corridor because it doesn't work. And that what we are pursuing is a blended system which works with the existing infrastructure we have out there today.
Okay. And you haven't received any response, obviously, on that yet. That's too soon. But you did make it very clear that you were interested in only the blended system and not the 4-track.
That's correct.
And that you wouldn't be studying the 4-track either.
That is correct.
Okay. I think we have a few questions up here, and then we have some public comment. Councilmember Klein?
Yeah, just a couple questions. Thank you. I'm going to see you on Friday, so I'll just keep these short. And you just answered part of it, the phased approach. I mean, they're still using language phased approach, which nobody really understands what that means then if it's not 4-track. And so that clarity needs to come, but it creates a general heartburn with everybody, what phased means. I mean, it can mean anything now, and all the people who actually were behind the original phase plan are gone. And so there's a lot of new people who may have a different definition. And there was also discussion about potentially intersections being closed, and there needing to be a recirculation of just traffic studies on some of those areas and how that impacts. Is that part of what Caltrain is going to be doing as well, or is that solely going to be on the high-speed rail shoulders in terms of their phased approach?
So in that revised environmental document, they identified impacts associated with the 4-track system. So Caltrain is not going to be doing anything with looking at impacts of a 4-track system because we're not going there. So high-speed rail is going to need to address those questions from the stakeholders.
Okay. Thanks, I figured that much. And then, are there strings attached? Are there strings attached? Essentially, your financing is coming from the high-speed rail. And are there strings attached to your program? So what Caltrain wants to do may not be what Caltrain gets to do, because the fact is you're accepting billions of dollars through a different agency, essentially.
So there are strings attached. If you just put that part very bluntly, it's their money. So whatever we do to invest their money, they want it to, in the long term, and I don't know what the long term is because I don't know when they'll get here, that it needs to support high-speed rail trains going to the downtown San Francisco area. So yes, there are strings attached. The only thing I will add is I believe that there will be an opportunity to set the parameters in which the strings are attached, as we will need to get into some sort of an agreement for the money to flow. And I think if we define that in a way that works for us in the local communities as well as high-speed rail, that could actually benefit us. I think one of the criticisms that Caltrain has heard is our initial MOUs with high-speed rail. That it was too broad and it didn't set parameters about what the partnership was about. If we can achieve an understanding of potentially the early investment and that we're looking at a blended system, this could be an opportunity where we, for the first time, capture some of those parameters linked to the string.
Okay. And then on mechanicals, are you guys looking solely at electrical, or is there a consideration of hybrid diesels and those types of different types of trains?
We are looking at electrical.
Okay.
And just to follow up on that, the diesels won't fit through some of the tunnels, is that right?
The
hybrid diesels will fit, but not the electrical. The electricals and hybrid diesels would fit through the tunnel.
Yeah, it's this comes up a couple of times. There are other things that can fit. What has guided Caltrain's want for the EMUs is that its performance is superior to diesel technology. And the volatility associated with payment of diesel and the impact it has on our ongoing O&M costs are some of the key drivers for us wanting to land on the EMU technology.
And then I have two last. The last one is just, there's also an issue of compatibility between two systems. You have an electrical system that may be preferred. High-speed rail may, in fact, have a different system, and there may have to be some kind of working out of that if we don't want to lose money on one or the other.
So that relates to our electrical system that we would be designing if all of this works is compatible for both systems. What you're getting at that has been a discussion has to do with our advanced signal system, right. Which we've been calling CBOS PTC. Right. And there is a public debate about what technology we should use. And so all of the work that's being done right now with that advanced signal system is during a one-year critical design phase with performance attributes that we'd like, and we're doing that with input from high-speed rail. So at the end of this one-year phase, we'll be able to have some definitive answers about how everything will work together.
Okay. And the last is just grade separations, and my question is, if we don't have grade separations, let's just say in this town or other towns, but there's a doubling in trains, how does that impact the neighborhood? There may be less vibrations, a lighter train, those things, but there will be more horns. I mean, has that been thought through? Is there any discussion about what to do with the intersections?
So the second green box at the very top, that is the study to get at that question, and we will be looking at the change in gate downtime associated with the blended system service plans. And then we're going to look at the impact on local traffic at all 40 grade crossings. And then we'll be able to sit down and say, this is the level of impact. What do we need to do with this at grade crossing?
Thanks. Thank you.
Councilmember Ferguson?
Thank you. I'm just going to go back to the phasing question. So you mentioned the lawsuit. Actually, Menlo Park, of course, was a part of that lawsuit, not just Atherton. So when will we, so it has, yes, been making everybody very nervous, the fact that they're continuing to talk about a four-track system. To us, the SU's Midian-Gordon plan, or blended system, what's very important about that is that there is no larger system in a later phase. That what we see in the EIR are acceptable options within those parameters. So it's a two-track system, potentially with a passing track here or there. When are we going to see an environmental document, or what's the timeline for an environmental document that would act either a program or a program EIR or a project EIR that actually acknowledges that, and so that we don't have this program EIR hanging out there that has something that's totally unacceptable to the peninsula?
So I'm going to answer half that question, and I do want to point out that Catherine is here, who is a consultant to high-speed rail. So if it starts to get really heated, I'm going to ask her to come up, but I will answer the half of the question. If the early investment strategy comes to fruition, when you will see an environmental document is a project-level EIR, an EAEIR, for just Caltrain electrification. If this early investment proposal works. The unknown is how much of the blended system might be added to it, but you'll essentially see an environmental document that says, these are our existing tracks, we want to electrify it, here's what it looks like, and here are the impacts. So that's at the project level. The reason I can't answer the second question, I'm looking at Catherine, is because I don't know what comments they got on the partially updated environmental document that was out there circulating and how that's going to get addressed by the High-Speed Rail Authority. So I don't know what High-Speed Rail will do with that document, but I could tell you when we get down to the project level document and this proposal moves forward, it will talk about Caltrain electrification, the blended system.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, Catherine doesn't need to come up. On positive train control, what matters to people in Menlo Park, San Mateo County purchased the JPB right-of-way many years ago for public transportation, regional transportation. It's a regional transportation corridor first and foremost. And I think what matters to people in Menlo Park is regional mobility and local service. You mentioned in the green box, the middle green box, kind of the service levels. In 2005, Menlo Park service levels were quite drastically cut, and we're still we're struggling with that. That forced people back in the cars, and it's hurt our community. Will that be taken? Is that at the forefront of planners' minds, transportation planners' minds, as they weigh the various options? We'd like to see our service restored.
One of the primary goals that I know our general manager is committed to, I don't want to sound like I'm selling this, but it's what we're trying to do is with the electrified system and the electric trains. Here's the bottom line: if we keep the travel time the same, our approximately 1 hour travel time from San Francisco to San Jose, if we keep that same travel time but we have an electrified system with our EMUs, we can double the number of stops. We can serve more stations and provide more service to the cities. So one of the benefits of the electrified system, and which is something that we've been trying to do, is provide more local service with this new technology. Now, what I will say is we have not yet landed on what that schedule is that everyone's interested in, because what we first have to do is figure out what general service level we're open to contemplating in the corridor. But once we do that, we will go through a process where we look at different schedules, and we're committed to restoring service and also providing more service.
Okay, thanks. Well, we'll definitely be watching that process closely. In the list of projects, I didn't see quiet zones, and that's something that has been a high priority for this community. Can you comment on that? I didn't see quiet zones on there.
Sure. So as part of the green box up at that corner, the grade crossings and traffic study, people have been asking what's going to happen to noise and will quiet zones help and all of that. So that'll get addressed in that study, which is to be completed late this summer.
Okay. Well, that will be something that we'll read with interest as well. And then the strings attached question that Councilmember Klein asked, I guess we just want every care to be taken in any MOUs. I mean, we don't want to make a deal with the devil here. We've had, years of struggle with high-speed rail. And, it will be very important that we scrutinize that agreement and ensure that the peninsula's interests, this community's, Menlo Park's interests, are carefully preserved, or we won't take the money. Thank you.
Councilmember Otake?
Are passing tracks contemplated for Menlo Park?
No.
Okay, because when I heard you say 8 to 10 miles out of
Yeah,
60 miles. I was thinking 1 in 6 chance.
I said no, but can I clarify?
Sure.
So of the 5 concepts, 4 concepts entail adding 2 additional tracks, so 1 track per direction for high-speed rail. For those options, Menlo Park is not in there, but there is a 5th option that we haven't figured out where it's going to go, and it's just 1 additional track that would support bi-directional high-speed rail trains. We know that has to be longer than 8 to 10 miles, but we don't know how much longer yet and where it should be located. So that's the only exception to my answer.
Okay, and that hasn't been decided where that was.
We're in the process of trying to figure out where that could fit.
Okay. Also, I'm assuming electrical requires the sort of aerial lines, and and do you have visualizations or any sort of visual models or renderings that available on either your website or some way that residents can get a sense of what that will look like visually?
Sure, we will put that up if
Thank
it's
you.
not already there.
And I wanted to ask you about the Attorney General's decision. I know there's been a request to find out if the blended plan satisfies Prop 1A, and I think that request was made about 7-8 months ago. Have you heard anything?
We have not heard anything.
All right. And do you know when you might?
We have asked in high-speed rail. They haven't given us a time frame. I don't know if Catherine. Yeah. So we know the request is there, but that's all we know.
All right. Thank you. I think we'll go to some public comments. Thank you very much for coming and speaking to us tonight. We have 4 cards, and the first person is Don Barnby, followed by Martin Masmer. Good evening.
Thank you. Don Barnby, Menlo Park. Under the rubric of a blended system, Caltrain is being used by HSR as a Trojan horse to bypass real substantive problems of using the Caltrain highway by high-speed rail. Caltrain is making a serious mistake in tying itself and its future to the dead weight of HSR. Tie the two together and watch them both sink. Caltrain is important to Menlo Park and the entire Bay Area. We must not tie its future and the associated freight traffic to an HSR project that is extremely shaky financially and on shaky legal grounds. I don't want to see this council contribute to the failure of Caltrain. There's no need for our council members to go on record of supporting this Trojan horse. It's way too early to be asking for endorsement when HSR plan is so faulty and incomplete. This city should not endorse or make any comment that could possibly be construed as an endorsement. The best is just to say no. High-speed rail is failing. High-speed rail business plan calls for 4 tracks. There's been talk about changing that, but it is not changed. It's insane for high-speed rail to now contemplate building for billions of dollars a blended system with electrification and no grade separation now, and then imagine it will tear it all up to later achieve grade separation and maybe add additional tracks. The high-speed rail business plan discusses a 2-track system with 170 trains a day. That's 8 to 10 trains an hour, one way, if I just heard correctly, cutting off access between Highway 101 and the main part of town every 6 to 7.5 minutes one direction. That's 3 to 4 minutes both directions. We cannot bet on absurdly inflated ridership numbers that HSR is projecting to claim profitability that is asserted to justify capital expenditure. Properly figured, the total bill for HSR is $250 billion. Caltrain and Menlo Park must not proceed without HSR identifying and guaranteeing funding sources up front as required by law. We cannot gamble that the third HSR business plan has finally got it right without truly independent financial review. Already it's been shown to be rife with misleading data and statements. We here must not proceed without binding agreement of a two-track, one-time build that will not destroy trees and homes along the peninsula, without an ironclad agreement to go underground, without certified EIR, without assurance that high-speed rail plans are legal and in accordance with the vote of the people. Just say no.
Thank you. Martin.
Thank you.
Martin,
And thanks for
Nassman.
the extra few minutes there.
You're welcome. Yeah, we have a 3-minute
Good
time
evening.
frame. Good evening.
I had actually thought about some things to say and prepared some remarks, but I'm not going to use those. I respect what you have to do as council members and being polite. I don't have to that. I'm never going to run for office. I'm never going to go through what you have to do. I have great respect for what you do, especially in the city of Menlo Park. Watching many of the council members address this and other issues. What I've heard tonight is a crock of lies. I use a little stronger language. AB 3404 specifically and unambiguously spells out certain requirements. Sometimes there's gray areas in the law, sometimes there's other areas. This is so far off the mandate of the Proposition 1A and 3404 that it can't even possibly be legal for them to do a blended system. I believe that what they're talking about, using Caltrain as a stalking horse, is to put in a procedure to put the 4 tracks up the peninsula, irregardless of what anybody here wants. I find it difficult to understand how anybody with any type of background in this can consider running trains at 110 miles an hour without having a fully grade-separated system. I live near Encinal where it crosses the tracks. And I will tell you the number of kids who try to sneak across there as they're coming home from Encinal school on a daily basis. I've probably seen it 5 or 6 or 7 times over the last couple of years. And I always honk my horn at them, telling them, don't try to beat that damn gate. At 80 miles an hour, it's one thing. At 110 miles an hour, we're going to have to start asking our friends from Caltrain what the acceptable casualty ratios are. And it's a very serious issue, and I don't see any way around it. I was right outside this building not too long ago when I heard Joe Simitian talking about absolutely, positively staying within the Caltrain right-of-way. And now we're talking about not staying within the Caltrain right-of-way. We're talking about passing tracks. So just a simple calculation, by the way, will show you know exactly where those passing tracks have to go. The options on that aren't dictated by policy. It's dictated by engineering. And she knows right now where those, or her engineers know, where those things have to go, yet she stands here and says, no, I don't. Please be skeptical.
Thank you. Adina Levin, followed by Alan Bushell, and that's the last card on this topic. Good evening.
Good evening, council members. My name is Adina Levin. I live in Menlo Park, and today I'm speaking with my friends of Caltrain hat on. As folks will remember, Friends of Caltrain organized about a year ago to organize with thousands of residents in the Caltrain corridor to preserve Caltrain service from drastic cuts. And we are also organizing to help get Caltrain stable funding going forward and hopefully to help with modernization going forward as well. Last night we actually organized with Sierra Club and some other San Francisco groups a meeting on the fast track system up in the city that had 50 people. Very interesting topic, very interesting to people. We had another meeting down here a few weeks ago on this fast track system as well. I'd really like to thank and commend Marion Lee on her leadership of the modernization program and in her honesty and methodical approach and over time really doing thoughtful outreach to the community and taking the feedback into the iterative phases of that project. So that gives me a lot of confidence that what Caltrain is saying about this is true, and they will continue to work with the community. I'm very happy to hear Caltrain say that the 4-track system from their perspective is dead. I would like to see it be absolutely and definitively dead and to, not have the zombie come back out of the coffin, but, stay there with nails. high-speed rail's early outreach to the communities was absolutely atrocious, and I'm glad to see Caltrain working with the community in a much more respectful and reasonable way. There are a lot of ifs with this project. With the high-speed rail business plan, are the finances going to hold up? Is it enough for legislators to vote for it? Is the Attorney General going to rule that this meets the requirements of Proposition 1A? So with those ifs, if high-speed rail is moving forward and it's determined to be legal and we're investing in it, then a version of that plan that invests in our corridor, that gets us investment long before 2030 in the old business plan, but gets us investment sooner, which will get us more frequent service, more service to Menlo Park, to be able to carry more riders, because Caltrain is starting to get full at high rush hour. This plan, if high-speed rail goes forward, this is a better plan for the area, and I hope that we support it.
Thank you. And then our final card is Alan Bushell. Good evening.
Alan Bushell, Menlo Park. I have worked extensively as a member of the William Grindley group that has looked very, very hard at high-speed rail. We've written extensively. All of our papers and documents are published on cchsr.org. I just listened with interest to this presentation, as it's somewhat new to me, but we would certainly need an equivalent amount of time to come and help you understand some of the shortcomings of what was presented this evening. But things that come to my mind are that I'm concerned, as is the previous speaker, that Caltrain may be hooking itself to HSR, which is not going to give them a timely solution to the issues that Caltrain are facing. The high-speed rail program, as you probably know, is fraught with problems. Its time frame has been extended out to 2034. Its funding has tripled since the proposition was passed, and that the availability even of $100 billion to the system is highly speculative. The number of trains that HSR used to compare the number of highway lanes that would be needed was one train carrying 700 passengers every 5 minutes for 19 hours a day between Southern California and Northern California, each direction. 6 trains and 4 high-speed trains does not do it for what they're talking about. In order to get their ridership numbers, they have to have an astronomical number of trains going in the corridor. The probability of high-speed rail happening, we could take an hour to explain it to you. It's all written up in our documentation, but that money is just not there. There is no financing, and for this $1 billion of Prop 1A money that can be used for other activities, there are 5 or 6 jurisdictions that are all going to compete like crazy for that money. But it's not even clear that that money is going to be available to them, because their Prop 1A and 3034 requirements of no subsidy, profitability of the segment, 2 hours and 40 minutes door to door, LA Central to San Francisco Central, that all have to be met to qualify for that money. That money is going to be fiercely fought over and may not even be available. So for Caltrain to hang its hat on this, I think diverts their attention away from addressing the problems that they have. They've got to look at hybrid diesel. It can be implemented right away. It doesn't require putting in electrification that satisfies high-speed rail. It's a Caltrain solution for Caltrain, because Caltrain may not be around long enough if it waits for high-speed rail to come through by 2034. We've got to have a solution for Caltrain in the near term to make the peninsula a functional environment. But as I said before, we would be happy to come back to you as a group, the Grindley Group, and help in any way we can to help you understand these issues. But that's just a short response, and there's my time. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Lee, may we just ask a few more questions while you're here this evening? Hi, thank you.
Sure.
On the passing tracks, you mentioned that there were about 5 places that were that you're looking at, you're going to have dialogue. Can you just state what those 5 places are, please?
Sure. The one in the northern segment, first of all of these builds off of, even though we have a primarily 2-track system, we have sections where we have 3 and 4 tracks, so we try to build off of those existing 4-track areas. So the first one in the north is from approximately Bayshore Station, going south to the Millbrae Station. That's the northern option.
So can you just state how many miles long each section is, if you know?
Yeah, they're all in the bracket of about 8 to 10 miles. Some might be a little bit shorter, but I think they try and capture about 5 stations in that segment. And then the middle section, there were 2 versions. It's from Hayward Park Station to Redwood City is the longer version. And then we did a shorter version of that where we landed slightly short of Redwood City because Redwood City is very complicated. So just past San Carlos, Whipple area. And then the one in the southern section is from San Antonio to approximately Lawrence. So those ones have been identified. That longer, the third track where it's not 2 additional tracks but just the 1 track, that one we haven't figured out yet. That one is still to be located.
Okay. And then you just heard, concern from people that you need many more trains to make high-speed rail feasible, and now with what you're studying, it looks like maybe 4 an hour. Can you address that?
Sure. So first, the baseline that we assumed was our 6-train service. So just forgetting high-speed rail, we've always wanted to figure out how to increase our service levels and provide more service. So today we operate 5, and in our electrification project we wanted to increase that to 6. With this blended system, without the passing tracks, we have the capacity to add 2 high-speed rail trains on top of R6. And then if we have passing tracks, then we can add 4 on top of R6.
Right, I understood the presentation, but
yeah.
I think the question really was, is that feasible financially for high-speed rail to have so few when they originally prepared for so many?
That I can't answer. One of the questions Caltrain has been asking high-speed rail, even in this discussion of 2 to 4, we've been having frank discussions about if we can't get passing tracks, you would have 2 trains that could go up to 2 trains in this corridor. We've asked them to think about what happens if they turned trains at Dearden and only had a limited amount going up our peninsula. I don't have a clear answers to their business case about what that would mean for the system-wide project, but those are the types of inputs we've been giving high-speed rail.
So that would mean to stop the high-speed rail trains at Dearden?
Potentially some could turn and go back, and only a certain amount goes to Transbay Terminal.
Okay. And then lastly, there was some concern earlier about Caltrain selling any portion of the right-of-way. Can you address that?
Yeah, so the one thing that Caltrain has been clinging onto is the ownership of the right-of-way. That is our biggest negotiating. We own it. Without it, I don't know how much leverage we have. So we own the corridor. We have not given up any of that. And whatever use high-speed rail has on that corridor is to be negotiated and the parameters set. And none of that dialogue has happened because we have not yet agreed to what it is we want to build out there. But we haven't given away any aspect of the right-of-way.
And you have no intention of doing that?
No.
All right. Thank you very much for coming tonight, and we appreciate your presentation.